She almost didn't stop. That's the part that keeps Amara Osei awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling of a bedroom that still smells like the hospital she just left. The part her mind returns to like a tongue probing a wound. She almost kept walking, almost told herself it wasn't her problem, almost let the burning car and the unconscious man inside it become someone else's emergency, someone else's moral crisis, someone else's defining moment. She almost didn't stop, but she did. And now there are men with guns watching her apartment building from a black sedan that hasn't moved in 4 days. Now her name is being spoken in rooms she'll never be allowed to enter. Now, the man she pulled from that burning wreckage, the man she breathed life back into on a wet Chicago street at 2 a.m., is sitting across from her in a penthouse that costs more per month than her mother earned in a decade in Accra, telling her that her act of kindness has made her a target, that helping him was the most dangerous thing she has ever done, that the people who set that fire are still out there, that they now know her name. Amara Osei is 25 years old. She is a second-year nursing student from Accra, Ghana, working double shifts at Northwestern Memorial to pay tuition, remittances, and the rent on an apartment she shares with two other women who work nights. She has $847 in her savings account, a student visa that expires in 14 months, and a mother who believes her daughter is safe in America. She was safe until the night she stopped. This is the story of what happens when a good person makes a good choice in a very bad world. When compassion becomes collateral damage, when the line between saving someone and being destroyed by them disappears entirely. This is the story of Amara Osei and Seo Jin-ho, and how one burning car changed everything. Chicago in February is not a city. It is a punishment. Amara understood this now in a way she hadn't when she'd first arrived from Accra 18 months ago, bright-eyed and wool-coatless, unprepared for the particular cruelty of Midwest winter. She understood it in her bones, literally. The cold settled into her joints, her knuckles, the spaces between her vertebrae, on the walk home from her double shift at Northwestern Memorial. It was 2:14 a.m. She knew the time precisely because she'd checked her phone in the hospital lobby before stepping into the cold, calculating whether the 24-hour pharmacy on Michigan Avenue would still be open. Her feet were destroyed. 12 hours on concrete floors had compressed every cushion her sneakers pretended to offer. Her lower back ached with a specific grinding persistence that she'd learned to ignore, the way you learn to ignore a leaking faucet. It's always there, always draining something. The shift had been hard in the way hospital shifts are hard when they strip you of the comfortable illusion that medicine saves people. A man had come in at 7 o'clock p.m. with a cardiac event so catastrophic that the attending physician had looked at his chart and then looked at Amara with a specific expression she was still learning to decode. The one that meant, prepare yourself for what's coming. The man died at 9:47 p.m. His wife had been in the waiting room for 3 hours, holding a paper cup of cold coffee, rehearsing the face she'd make when someone came through those doors. Amara had been the someone. It was the fourth death notification she'd participated in this month. She was still learning how to leave them at the hospital, how to walk out the door without carrying the weight of other people's worst moments. She hadn't learned yet She wasn't sure she ever would. She took the long way home. Not because it was faster, it wasn't, but because she needed the cold air to do the work the hospital walls couldn't, to scour her clean, to remind her that she was alive, that her lungs still worked, that the world outside the hospital was still turning without consulting her about its direction. She was on the underpass stretch of Wacker Drive when she smelled it. Burning. Not the ordinary burning smell of a city. Not exhaust, not restaurant grease, not the particular acrid signature of Chicago's industrial South. This was different. This was the smell of something catastrophic and recent. The smell of metal and fuel and something synthetic melting at temperatures it was never designed to withstand. She heard it before she saw it. The crumple of metal. The hiss of steam. The particular silence that follows a violent event. The city holding its breath before it decides how to react. The car had gone through the guardrail on the ramp curve. A black sedan. The kind of car that costs more than Amara's entire nursing degree, now crumpled against the concrete support pillar with its front end compressed into something that no longer resembled a vehicle's front end. Smoke was pouring from the engine compartment. Not just smoke. Flame. Thin and hungry, licking along the undercarriage toward the fuel line with the patient intensity of something that understood it had time. Amara stopped. Her rational mind performed its calculations with the speed her nursing training had sharpened. Fire plus fuel line equals explosion. Night plus underpass equals no witnesses. Alone plus unknown situation equals danger. Her phone had 12% battery. The hospital was 14 minutes away. She also saw the man slumped over the steering wheel. Dark hair. Broad shoulders compressed by the crumpled door frame. One hand visible through the shattered driver's window. Fingers relaxed in the particular way that meant unconscious, not dead. There was a difference she'd learned to read. A thin line of blood from his hairline tracking down his temple with the methodical persistence of water finding its level. He was breathing. She could see the shallow rise and fall even from 10 feet away. She also saw the fire getting less thin. Amara Osei did not think of herself as a brave person. She thought of herself as a practical person. And practically speaking, there was a man dying in a burning car on an empty stretch of road at 2 a.m., and she was a person with medical training and functional hands, and the math of that situation only produced one answer. She ran. The driver's door was jammed. The impact had warped the frame, fused the door to its housing. She pulled anyway. Her nursing, calloused hands finding grip on the handle, her entire body weight thrown backward. Nothing. She changed angles, braced her foot against the car's body, pulled again. The door groaned, moved 2 inches. She pulled until something in her shoulder screamed in protest, and then the door gave, lurching open with a sound like a gunshot. The heat was immediate and personal. The fire had reached the edge of the engine compartment, and she could feel it on her face, her forearms, the exposed skin of her neck. The man was larger than he'd looked from outside. Tall, even folded into the driver's seat. Korean, she registered, her brain filing information with the clinical efficiency her training had developed. Late 30s, athletic build. Wearing clothes that, even in their current damaged state, announced serious money. His face was striking in the way that powerful people's faces often were. Not handsome exactly, but commanding, structured. The kind of face that occupied space. There was a gun in the center console. Amara's hands stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at the fire. Then she looked at the man. Then she reached across him, released his seatbelt, and began pulling. He was heavy. Dead weight. The literal kind is different from the theoretical kind. She'd learned this during her clinical rotations, moving patients who couldn't move themselves. You find muscles you didn't know you had. You discover that desperation is a legitimate physical force. She got him out. She didn't know precisely how. Some combination of leverage and urgency and the particular stubbornness that had carried her from Accra to Chicago on a scholarship and a prayer. She got him out, and she got them both clear of the vehicle, and she was performing her assessment. Airways, breathing, circulation, the ABCs that had been drilled into her until they were reflexes, not thoughts, when the car's fuel line reached its inevitable conclusion. The explosion wasn't like the movies. It was smaller and louder simultaneously. A percussive crack that she felt in her sternum, followed by a bloom of heat that pushed against her like a physical hand. Debris scattered across the road. She covered the unconscious man with her body without deciding to, just did it. Her nursing instinct redefining the boundaries of patient protection without consulting her fear. When she raised her head, the car was fully alight. The man beneath her was stirring. She moved immediately into assessment. His pulse was present. Strong, actually. Stronger than she'd have expected. And his pupils, when she managed to check them by the light of the burning car, were reactive. No obvious spinal compromise in the way he'd moved. Laceration on the forehead, superficial, despite the blood. Likely concussion. Possible rib fracture from the seatbelt. Nothing immediately fatal. He opened his eyes. They were very dark. And even clouded with pain and confusion, they held something she'd only seen in a handful of people in her life. An absolute and unsentimental assessment of every situation they encountered. He looked at her. He looked at the burning car. He looked at the empty road in both directions. He processed all of this in approximately 3 seconds. Then he looked back at her. "Who are you?" His voice was low, accented, Korean beneath the American smoothness, the way her own Ghanaian accent surfaced when she was tired or frightened. "My name is Amara. I'm a nursing student." "Don't move. I need to assess your spine before..." He moved. Sat up despite her hands pressing against his shoulders with the controlled deliberateness of someone accustomed to overriding their body's objections. His jaw tightened at what was clearly significant pain, but his eyes stayed steady. "My phone," he said, inside jacket pocket, left side. "You need to stay still. You may have a spinal..." "My phone. Please." There was something in the please that surprised her. Not the word itself. She'd heard please from patients before, but the way he said it. Like a man who didn't say it often and understood its weight precisely because of that. She found the phone. It was warm from his body heat. He took it from her, with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, unlocked it, and sent a text that took him 11 seconds. Then he looked at her again. How long was I unconscious? She checked her watch. 4 minutes, approximately. Maybe 5? What happened? Did you lose control of the... I did not lose control, he said, and the certainty in those 4 words was so absolute that she believed him immediately, before her rational mind could form a skeptical objection. Someone ran me off the road. They'll be checking to confirm the outcome. Amara's understanding of the situation reorganized itself entirely. Confirm the outcome. The outcome they were checking to confirm was his death. "We need to move," he said, and began pushing himself to his feet with the careful, determined movements of someone who had trained their body to function through pain. "You have a concussion," Amara said, standing with him automatically, her hands going to support his arm. "Possibly cracked ribs. You shouldn't be—" He looked at her, not unkindly, but with a directness that made her sentence stop itself. "Will you help me?" he asked. "You don't have to. You've already done more than anyone would expect, but I need to move from this location. And I need someone who knows what they're doing, medically." His eyes held hers. "I will not put you in danger." She almost laughed. She was standing next to a burning car with a man who'd just told her someone had tried to kill him, and she'd already pulled him from the wreckage. The danger component of the evening was not exactly theoretical anymore. She thought about her mother in Accra, about the medical bills she was sending money home to cover, about the rent due in 11 days, about the man dying at 9:47 p.m., and the face his wife had made when Amara came through those doors. She thought about the fact that she was still here, that her hands still worked, that she had them for a reason. "Where do we need to go?" she asked. He told her his name was Jin. She would learn later, much later, in a way that reframed everything she thought she'd understood, that this was both true and not true. Jin was what remained of Seo Jin Ho when he was trying to be something smaller than he was. It was the name he used when he needed to move through the world without the weight of his actual name clearing the room before him. A black SUV arrived in 7 minutes. She knew because she counted, her anxiety manufacturing precise metrics in the absence of anything useful to do. 2 men emerged, large, Korean, moving with the synchronized efficiency of people trained in violence who were performing competence in front of a civilian they hadn't decided about yet. They helped Jin into the vehicle with practiced movements that told her this wasn't the first time they'd retrieved him from a dangerous situation. She stood on the road beside the dying fire. "Get in," Jin said from the back seat. His voice carried the particular authority of someone who issued instructions rather than requests, but he was looking at her with something that complicated the authority, something that acknowledged she had a choice. She got in. The SUV smelled like leather and money and something else. Gun oil. She realized later. The kind of smell that lives in a vehicle used by armed men. She sat beside Jin, watching him navigate his pain with controlled breathing while his security personnel made phone calls in rapid Korean. And she tried to inventory what she actually knew about the situation. A man had been run off the road. Someone wanted him dead. He had armed personnel who arrived in under 8 minutes. He wore a watch that probably cost more than her annual scholarship. He said confirm the outcome with the fluency of someone for whom assassination attempts were not entirely outside the ordinary range of events. She was a nursing student from Accra with $847 in her savings account. The SUV took her to a building on the Gold Coast that she'd walked past 100 times without ever looking directly at. The way you learn not to look directly at things that represent a world entirely closed to you. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. It was the kind of space that didn't decorate itself to impress. It simply existed in its expensiveness, the way mountains exist in their height, without apology or effort. While she cleaned and dressed his laceration, assessed his ribs, two cracked, not broken, and checked his pupillary response with a penlight she always kept in her nursing bag, she was also performing a different kind of assessment. The apartment told her things. Security cameras in every corner, angled for coverage, not aesthetics. A wall of monitors in the study, visible through the open door, showing feeds from what appeared to be multiple locations across the city. Bookcases filled with texts in Korean, Mandarin, English, law, economics, history, and a single shelf of Korean poetry that surprised her when she noticed it. A photograph on the desk, the only personal item visible. A teenage boy, maybe 16, with Jin's eyes and a smile that suggested he had not yet learned to be careful with it. "You have a son," she said. Jin was sitting very still while she worked. The stillness of someone accustomed to managing pain without visible acknowledgement. He looked at the photograph. "Jae-won," he said. "He's in Seoul, attending school." He paused. "He doesn't know what his father does." "What does his father do?" Amara asked. She hadn't planned the question. It came from the same place her hands had come from when they'd reached across a burning car without consulting her survival instincts. The part of her that processed the world directly, without the buffer of social caution. Jin looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I manage interests," he said finally. "Shipping, real estate, other enterprises." "Other enterprises," Amara repeated, pressing carefully along his rib cage, watching his face for the involuntary flinch that would tell her where the pain peaked. "What kind of other enterprises run people off roads at 2 a.m.? The corners of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of one. "The kind that attract competitors," he said. She finished her assessment. 2 cracked ribs, significant concussion, laceration that would leave a small scar at his hairline. Nothing immediately life-threatening, provided he rested and avoided further violence, which she suspected was a significant caveat in his particular line of work. "You should go to a hospital," she said. "No hospitals." He said it with the finality of someone for whom this was not a new conversation. "Then you need someone to monitor you through the night. Concussion protocol requires—" "I know," he said. "I've had concussions before." She bet he had. One of his security personnel appeared in the doorway, the one she'd privately labeled the taller one, because they both projected the same quality of contained readiness, and she needed something to distinguish them. He spoke in Korean. Jin responded, brief and decisive. He turned back to her. "My security chief will take you home," he said. "He will also ensure that you are not followed." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. A precision entering it, like a calculation completing itself. "I'd like to offer you compensation for what you did tonight, and for your discretion." He named a number. It was obscene. It was more than she made in 3 months of double shifts. She should have taken it and left. Every reasonable, survival-oriented instinct she possessed told her to take the money, get in the car, and never think about Jin again. "I don't want your money," she said instead. "I want to know that you're going to be monitored through the night. You have a serious concussion and cracked ribs, and you just survived what sounds like an assassination attempt, and you need a medical attendant, Jin said quietly. She stopped. I need a medical attendant tonight, he continued, watching her with those carefully neutral eyes, someone who knows what they're doing. I don't trust hospital personnel. Not tonight, not with what happened. He paused. I'm asking you to stay. Not permanently, just through the night. You'll be paid for your time, you'll be returned home safely, and you'll be under no obligation beyond tonight. Amara looked at him. This man who had a gun in his center console and armed personnel who moved like weapons and a teenage son in Seoul who didn't know what his father did. This man who had just survived an attempt on his life and was sitting in his penthouse with cracked ribs, making precise requests with careful eyes and a voice that had learned to deploy vulnerability like a strategic resource. She thought about her mother, about Accra, about the man who had died at 9:47 p.m. She thought about the fact that she was still here. I'll stay through the night, she said, but I'm checking your pupils every 2 hours. And if you show any signs of intracranial pressure, we're going to a hospital regardless of your feelings about it. Jin looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Agreed, he said. She stayed through the night. Then she stayed through the morning, because his concussion symptoms were worse than she'd initially assessed, and she wasn't willing to leave until she was confident he wasn't bleeding into his brain cavity. Then she stayed through lunch because Mrs. Park, the housekeeper, a small, quiet Korean woman in her 60s who navigated the penthouse with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that invisibility was a survival strategy, brought her soup that smelled like home in a way she couldn't explain. And because Jin was awake and talking and she was learning things, she didn't plan to keep coming back. It happened the way things happen when you tell yourself they won't. Gradually, then all at once. Jin's security chief called her 2 days later. Jin was asking whether she would consider a temporary arrangement. His regular physician was unavailable. His ribs needed monitoring. The compensation would be significant. She said she'd think about it. She thought about her tuition payment due in 6 weeks, about her brother's school fees in Accra, about the $847 in her savings account, and the rent, and the double shifts, and the exhaustion that had become so constant she'd stopped recognizing it as exhaustion and started accepting it as her permanent state of being. She called back. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. 2 weeks. Medical monitoring while his ribs healed and his concussion symptoms resolved. She would come in the evenings after her shifts, assess his condition, update his care protocol. She would ask no questions about the business conducted in the rooms she was told not to enter. She would see nothing, hear nothing, maintain professional discretion. What she actually saw over those 2 weeks was something more complicated. She saw how Jin moved through his world with the kind of authority that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to, the way rooms reorganized around him when he entered, the way conversations stopped and restarted in his presence, edited by the awareness of his attention. She saw the men who came and went, the business associates who arrived through the private elevator and left with expressions that suggested they'd been resolved one way or another. She also saw how he was with the photograph on his desk. Every morning, when she arrived, It was in the same position, angled precisely toward his chair, so that Jaewon's face was the first thing he saw when he sat down. She watched him look at it sometimes when he thought she was occupied with her notes. The expression on his face in those moments was the only one she'd seen from him that was entirely unguarded. All the precision and control stripped away, leaving something raw and complicated, love and guilt and a grief she didn't yet understand the source of. "What happened to Jaewon's mother?" she asked one evening, 3 weeks in. She hadn't planned the question. It arrived the way her other, unplanned questions did, from the direct, unfiltered part of her that processed the world without social buffering. Jin was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. He was looking at the photograph. "She left," he said finally. "When Jaewon was 9, when she understood what my business actually was." He paused. "She was right to leave. I told her so." "Does Jaewon know that?" "He knows she left. He doesn't know what I told her." Jin's jaw tightened slightly. He believes she chose to go, that she didn't want to stay. Amara thought about that. About a boy in Seoul who thought his mother had chosen to leave him. About a father who had told the truth to protect a woman and allowed his son to believe a lie that would shape how he understood love and abandonment for the rest of his life. "That's not a kindness," she said, letting him believe she chose to go. Jin looked at her. He did this often, this direct, assessing look, the look of someone recalibrating in real time. "No," he said slowly, "it isn't." The first test came at the end of the 3rd week. She arrived at the Penthouse to find a different energy in the space, the specific tension of a situation that had recently been resolved by force. 2 of the security personnel had minor injuries. Jin was in the study conducting a video call in rapid Korean, and she caught the words "Donovan" and "the harbor," and contained before she was out of earshot, she went to the kitchen, made herself tea, reviewed her notes, said nothing. Later, she understood she'd been watched making that choice. The second test came the following week. One of Jin's associates, a man named Marcus, who seemed to operate as a liaison between Jin's world and Chicago's political infrastructure, approached her in the hallway and offered her money. Not Jin's money, different money, from a different pocket, for a different purpose. "All I need," Marcus said, "is a medical assessment. His current condition, any medications, anything that might affect his physical capabilities." Amara looked at him for a moment. "I'm bound by patient confidentiality," she said, "and I don't know who you're working for, but I'd suggest you consider whether this conversation is something you want Mr. Seo to know about." Marcus left. She told Jin that evening. He listened to her account without expression. Then he said, "Thank you." 2 words, but waited. She was beginning to understand that Jin's language was precise, that he didn't use words he didn't mean, which made the ones he used carry a density that ordinary speech didn't. "Why are you telling me?" he asked. "You could have taken the money and told me nothing." Amara considered the question genuinely. "Because someone tried to kill you 3 weeks ago, and you still don't know who sent them," she said. "And because I'm in this apartment regularly, which makes me a potential vector for information about you, and because I want to know that the people around you are the kind of people who tell you things." Jin looked at her. "What kind of people are around you?" he asked. The question surprised her. She thought about it. My mother, she said. My 2 flatmates. A professor at Northwestern who writes me recommendation letters. She paused. That's about it. His expression shifted. Something moved across it that she couldn't immediately classify. You're very alone, he said. It wasn't an observation delivered with pity. It was delivered with recognition, the way one person identifies a quality in another that they understand from the inside. So, are you, she said. 8 weeks in, the Black Sedan appeared. She noticed it on a Tuesday morning, parked across from her apartment building with the particular stillness of a vehicle occupied by people trying not to look like they're waiting. She noticed it again on Wednesday. On Thursday, she walked past it close enough to see 2 men inside, neither of them looking at her, both of them seeing her. She called Jin's security chief rather than Jin himself. She wasn't sure why. Some instinct about maintaining the boundaries of the arrangement, about not defaulting to him for every complication. She should have called Jin. The security chief, James, arrived at her apartment within 20 minutes. He reviewed the exterior cameras he'd apparently been running on her building since the night of the accident. Something she hadn't known about, something that should have troubled her more than it did. And his expression told her what she needed to know before he said it. They're Donovan's people, James said. Michael Donovan. He paused, choosing his words. He runs the Western Distribution Network in Chicago. He and Mr. CO have a territorial disagreement. Territorial disagreement? Amara repeated. Mr. CO survived an accident that Donovan's people arranged, James said carefully. Donovan now knows that Mr. CO survived. He's identifying every variable that contributed to that survival. She was a variable. She thought about her mother in Accra, about her brother, about the fact that she was in America on a student visa that could be complicated in 100 ways by 100 different pressures applied to 100 different points of leverage. She called Jin. He answered before the second ring. His voice was already different, not the carefully modulated professional tone she'd learned over 8 weeks, but something sharper. He'd already been told. Come to the building, he said. The study looked different at 11 a.m. on a Thursday than it did in the evenings when she came for medical appointments. The light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows at an angle that illuminated the monitor wall with merciless clarity, 8 screens showing feeds from what she now understood were surveillance positions across the city. The desk was occupied by 2 laptops and a series of documents in multiple languages. The room smelled like coffee and controlled urgency. Jin was standing at the window. He was fully healed. His ribs no longer required monitoring. His concussion symptoms had resolved 2 weeks ago. Their arrangement had continued anyway, extended by mutual unspoken agreement into something neither of them had formally defined. He turned when she came in. She'd expected the calculation she'd come to recognize, the precise assessment of every situation, the filing of variables, the derivation of solutions. She saw something else, something she hadn't seen before. I'm sorry, he said. The 2 words landed differently than she'd expected. Not the strategic sorry of a man managing a situation, the actual sorry of someone confronting the consequence of their choices in the face of someone who hadn't chosen those consequences. You didn't make me stay that night, she said. No, but I made it easy too. He turned back to the window. Donovan has surveillance photographs of you entering and leaving this building over the past 8 weeks. He has your immigration records. He knows about your mother's medical treatment, your brother's school in Accra. He knows enough to make your life very complicated if he decides you're a useful pressure point. What does he want? Amara asked. Information about me? My health? My schedule? My security protocols? He paused. Or he wants leverage to use against me in the negotiation we're currently conducting about the harbor contracts, so I'm leverage. You're an innocent person who was in an alley at the wrong time, Jin said, who made a choice that saved my life and is now being made to pay for it. He turned from the window. His expression was the most unguarded she'd ever seen it. Not the cracked armor vulnerability of the photograph moments, but a genuine direct confrontation with something he found intolerable. I can arrange for your protection, he said, your family in Accra, your position here. But I need to tell you something first, and I need to tell you honestly. Because you've been honest with me, and that is, he paused, rarer than you might imagine. Okay, she said, the accident 8 weeks ago. The car. He looked at her steadily. I wasn't simply run off the road. I was coming from a meeting where I had made a decision that cost Michael Donovan a significant amount of money and influence. The accident was a direct response to that decision. He paused. I knew the risk. When I made the decision, I made it anyway. She thought about that. About a man who knowingly made a decision that would provoke an assassination attempt and then drove himself through Chicago at 2 a.m. on a road where a burning car and a nursing student became his only chance of survival. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know who you're connected to, he said. Not the version I've allowed you to see. The man with cracked ribs and a photograph on his desk. The actual version. The man who makes decisions that cost other people their safety. She looked at him for a long moment. I've known who you are for about 6 weeks, she said. Something shifted in his face. You knew? I'm a nursing student. Not an idiot, she said. I've been coming to this apartment 3 times a week for 2 months. I have eyes, she paused. The question isn't who you are. The question is what you're going to do about Donovan and what that means for me. Jin was quiet for a moment. Then something happened that she hadn't seen before. The corner of his mouth actually moved, an involuntary, genuine response to something that surprised him. What I'm going to do about Donovan, he said slowly, is handle it. That's not specific enough. No. He looked at her. What I mean is, your protection is not contingent on the outcome of the Donovan situation. Your family's protection is not contingent on anything that has already been arranged. What I need from you is to decide whether you want to stay embedded in this world, knowing what it actually is, or whether you want to return to your life. She thought about her life, the double shifts, the $847, the exhaustion she'd stopped recognizing as exhaustion, the man who died at 9:47 p.m. She also thought about the photograph on the desk, about the Korean poetry shelf, about the way Jin had looked at her when she'd told him that letting Jae-won believe his mother had chosen to leave wasn't a kindness, about the way he'd said rarer than you might imagine when he talked about her honesty, with an expression that told her how long it had been since someone had simply told him the truth. I'm not going anywhere, she said. The Donovan situation resolved over 3 days. Amara wasn't present for most of it. She was at the hospital, working her shifts, being shadowed by Jin's security personnel at a distance that managed to be both unobtrusive and, she was coming to understand, absolute. She was monitored the way critical patients were monitored, continuously, by people whose entire professional purpose was to ensure that nothing went wrong. She found she didn't mind as much as she expected to. On the second day, Jin called her. Donovan has proposed a meeting, he said. Neutral territory. He wants to discuss the harbor contracts. He paused. He's also asked that you be present. She was quiet for a moment. Why? Because he knows you're important to me, Jin said. He wants to see how important. The neutrality of his tone when he said important to me was doing significant work. The carefully maintained distance of a man who had learned that expressing what he valued made it a target. She understood this now, understood the architecture of restraint he'd built around himself, room by room, after years of living in a world where vulnerability was a weapon handed to your enemies. What do you need me to do? She asked. Nothing, he said. Simply be present. Be yourself. She almost said, that's more than you realize. But she didn't. She was learning his language. The economy of it, the weight carried by words used sparingly. The meeting took place at a restaurant on the Magnificent Mile that closed for the evening, at the kind of money that suggested the owner understood discretion as a business service. Michael Donovan was not what she'd expected. He was compact, mild-faced, the kind of man whose violence was entirely subterranean, who had learned to do damage without ever looking like someone who did damage. He looked at Amara with the practiced assessment of someone who had learned to identify pressure points in people by looking at them. She looked back at him. She thought about her mother, about Accra, about the man who had died at 9:47 p.m. and the face his wife had made, about the fact that she had been standing in a cold Chicago street at 2 a.m., when most people were asleep, and that she had stopped, and that stopping had led to this restaurant, and this moment, and this man assessing her like she was a variable in his calculation. She thought about the fact that she was not a variable. She was Amara Osei. And she had pulled a man out of a burning car with her bare hands because it was the right thing to do, and she was not going to be intimidated by a mild-faced man in an expensive restaurant who did his damage underground. She sat down. The negotiation that followed was conducted almost entirely in language she wasn't meant to understand. Not Korean, but the private dialect of men who controlled territory through force and maintained it through calculation. Numbers were discussed. Arrangements were proposed. Jin spoke with the quiet precision she'd come to understand was his version of absolute authority. Donovan spoke with the performance of a man who wanted to seem like he was conceding more than he was. At one point, Donovan looked at her directly. Your nurse, he said to Jin. She doesn't seem frightened. She's not my nurse, Jin said. His voice was very quiet. Donovan looked at Jin. Something passed between them that Amara couldn't fully decode, but understood in outline. A reassessment of the landscape, a recalibration of what could and couldn't be leveraged. The meeting ended without violence. She understood, walking to the car afterward, that this was not the inevitable outcome it appeared to be. In the car, Jin was quiet for a long time. He threatened your visa status, he said finally, during the preliminary conversations. Before this evening, I assumed I've arranged for it to be resolved permanently. Residency, sponsorship, properly structured. He paused. That's separate from any arrangement between us. It's what should have been done when I realized my world had made you a target. He looked at her. It doesn't obligate you to anything. She looked back at him. Jin, she said, I know. 3 months after a burning car on a wet Chicago street, Amara Osei was sitting in the Penthouse study reviewing her nursing coursework when Jin came in and sat across from her and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the calculation, not the carefully controlled vulnerability, not the professional neutrality. Something else. Something that had decided to stop being managed. Jaewon is coming from Seoul next month, he said, for 2 weeks. She looked up from her textbook. He knows about you, Jin continued. I told him there was someone. He paused, navigating language with his usual precision. Someone whose judgment I trust. He wants to meet you. What did you tell him about me? That you pulled me out of a burning car, he said. That you've been honest with me when honesty was inconvenient. That you've stayed when staying wasn't simple. He paused. That this apartment feels different since you've been in it. She sat with that for a moment. Different how? Like it belongs to people instead of just to me, he said. Like it has rooms that serve purposes other than work and security. Amara thought about her apartment, her 2 flatmates who worked nights, the $847 that had become something else, entirely over the past 3 months, not gone, but redirected. Her mother's medical treatment funded, her brother's school fees covered, the specific weight of financial impossibility lifted from the center of her chest where it had lived for 3 years. She thought about the things that hadn't changed, the double shifts, the nursing degree she was still completing, that Jin had arranged through an accelerated program that somehow didn't require her to compromise her actual education, the part of her that belonged to herself, the direct, unfiltered, unimpressed part that had looked at Michael Donovan across a negotiating table and simply looked back. She thought about Jaewon in Seoul, with a photograph of a father he understood incompletely and a mother he believed had chosen to leave. He needs to know the truth, she said, about his mother. Why she left. Jin was quiet. I know, he said. She looked at him. I know, he said again. I've known for a while that the lie I told to protect her became a different kind of damage. He paused. I'm not always good at recognizing when protection becomes harm. You're learning, she said. Something happened in his face, that involuntary movement at the corner of his mouth that she'd seen exactly twice before. Stay, he said, not as a medical arrangement, not as a professional convenience. Stay because this household is becoming something that functions like a family, and I would like you to be part of it. He paused, and the precision in his voice became something else. Careful. Not because it was calculated, but because it was true. And true things required care. Stay because I have not been honest with very many people in my life, and I find that I want to be honest with you. That I want there to be someone in my life to whom I can say things that are true. She thought about everything she knew about him, the scarred knuckles and the Korean poetry shelf, the gun in the center console, and the photograph angled toward his chair. The way he said important to me, with a perfect neutrality to protect what it meant. The way he'd said I'm sorry, with nothing calculated in it at all. She thought about everything she knew about herself. The girl from Accra who had crossed an ocean on a scholarship and a prayer, and double shifts and willpower. Who had walked through cold Chicago streets at 2 a.m. with a dead man's face in her memory and the specific exhaustion of a person who carries more than they were built to carry and carries it anyway. She thought about a burning car. I'll stay, she said, but I have conditions. He waited. Jaywan gets the truth. About his mother. Whatever it costs you, he gets the truth. Because he deserves to understand his own life. She paused. And whatever you're building in this city, whatever the enterprise is, it doesn't touch people who can't protect themselves. I won't be part of a household that damages people without power. I won't watch that and say nothing. Jin looked at her for a long moment. Those are not small conditions, he said. No, she said, they're not. Another long moment. She held his gaze with the same direct steadiness she'd held Michael Donovan's across a negotiating table, not as performance, not as strategy, just as herself. Amara Osei, who had learned in a Lagos-adjacent apartment building and a Chicago hospital and an alley and a burning car and a penthouse study, that the most powerful thing she possessed was the unchangeable fact of who she was. Agreed, Jin said quietly. Both conditions. Agreed. Outside the study windows, Chicago spread itself across the horizon. A city of millions, each with their own crossing point, their own moment where they chose between the self-preserving choice and the other one. The one that costs something, the one that changes the trajectory of everything. Amara had made hers on a wet street at 2 a.m., standing in front of a burning car with her nursing bag in her bare hands and the specific stubbornness of a person who has decided that the world's failures are not an argument for her own. She had made hers. And now she was building something from all of their broken pieces. A man who needed to learn that protection and harm were not always opposites. A boy in Seoul who deserved to understand his own history. A woman from Accra who had crossed an ocean to discover that the most valuable thing she'd brought with her wasn't her nursing degree or her scholarship or her survival instincts. It was the part of her that stopped. That had always stopped. That would always stop. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know why she stayed. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the security. It wasn't even him. Not entirely. It was the same thing that made her stop on that bridge. The same thing that made her reach across a burning car with her bare hands. The same thing that made her look at a dangerous man and tell him the truth when lying would have been easier and safer and smarter. Some people are built for the right thing, even when the right thing is the hard thing. Amara Osei was one of them. And that is why everything changed.